Hey, everybody, welcome to yet another episode of Back to the Light. I am your host, JD Reager. With me is producer, musician, songwriter, music supervisor. The list goes on, and now it includes author Fred Mollin. Fred, how you doing?
I'm great, thank you.
We met because of your work with Lamont Dozier, and I kind of want to start there. How did you get connected with Lamont and take on that project that would become Reimagination?
Oh, well, thank you for a great remembrance. My love for Lamont Dozier and the Holland Brothers and those songs they wrote, which were basically almost every hit of the Supremes and Four Tops and music that changed the world.
Yeah,
Um,
almost all of my favorite Four Top songs. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, and you know how sweet it is. I mean, forget it. This Lamont and the brothers wrote the greatest songs, and I had an opportunity, I think around 1990, I'm thinking 97, through Jay Landers at EMI Records to do an album of what basically turned out to be many years later, Reimagination, which was an album of Lamont doing his most famous songs, unplugged, very intimate for the first time ever. So the song list was going to be incredible. And the label that Jay Landers was working with at EMI got dumped. And so that project never happened. But Lamont and I stayed in touch a little bit. And then through another person, David Guest, who was very well known in Memphis as a manager as well as a lunatic, got me involved in doing an album with Cliff Richard where I co-produced with Lamont. And that was probably, again, I'm thinking probably like 2006 maybe or something. And again, that project didn't work out, but Lamont and I loved each other. And so eventually I brought the idea to an investor in 2000, probably 2017, I think. And the investor loved the idea, and we did it carefully budgeted, but it's a very intimate, beautiful, historic record, and it's called Reimagination. And if you ever go look for it, it's one of my favorite projects.
Yeah, I listened to some of it again on Spotify last night just to refresh my memory. I love the version of Bernadette, especially. That's one of my favorite songs of his, and hearing it in his voice is just really, really cool.
Yeah, that's got a gorgeous guitar on it, doesn't it? It's Brian Sutton on that one, yeah.
And then for the recording of this project, for whatever reason, you decided to bring Lamont to Memphis, even though he's not really known as working on Memphis related stuff historically. What was the reason behind bringing him here?
Well, the investor or the co-investor really of the project was from Memphis, and I wanted to have some sort of Memphis connection. And I always loved working with Boo Mitchell, so I told Boo, I said, "How about let's go to your place and we'll do some vocals with Lamont." And so that's when I met you. We were in town doing vocals.
Do you remember what songs you worked on here in Memphis?
I probably don't. No, I mean I know we did about five or six.
Do you know? I mean, I'm curious how, once the album was finished, how you felt about it, but also, I mean, was Lamont proud of it?
Oh, I'd never seen him so happy. He was so proud of it. It was the first time he really had a chance to really show the world how he wanted to interpret those songs, but done in such an intimate, unplugged manner. It's timeless, you know. So yeah, we were talking about doing volume two, and he passed away.
Oh, that's really sad. Was
Yeah.
was he able to tour or perform on in support of the record at all?
We wanted to do a UK tour, and there was some hesitation that Barbara, his wife, who also passed away,
Oh, I
uh,
didn't know that.
yeah, Barbara was his manager as well as his wife, and she was fearful about a UK tour being too hard on him. I didn't agree, by the way, but it never came to pass.
Oh, that's too bad.
Hmm.
Well, I'd like to go back in time now and like maybe get into your backstory. Sorry if this is, kind of a softball generic question, but how did you originally fall in love with music?
You know, I came from I came from a household from Merrick, Long Island, and uh, my dad and my mom were just, working folks, middle class. I never heard them listen to music ever. I mean, like ever. And I was fortunate because I had an older brother and an older sister. And my sister was 11 years older than me, and she was a Bobby Soxer. My brother loved R&B. So I got to hear the radio. And that's, I heard rock and roll at age 3. And by age 4, I was asking my mother to take me to the record store to buy records. So my love of music started there. And then I realized I was musical because apparently at age 4 and 5, I would take the garbage cans in the backyard, which were made out of metal at that point, and I would put them into a drum set formation and I would drum on them, which of course I'm sure made everyone just so thrilled. But I clearly had this musical bent early on. And then when I had the Beatles hit me in 1964, February 9th, the world changed for everyone. And certainly many musicians my age, we all looked at that TV and said, oh my God, that's what I want to do.
Was that what made you decide that you could do this yourself?
It's it made me decide that it was the only path I would have ahead of me. I really felt like it was a calling, like the priesthood, I say in my book, although I don't like using that analogy, but I do think that it really was a calling.
You said your folks weren't particularly musically inclined, but were they supportive of your decision to be a musician?
They were. I mean, my mom especially. My mom was a real enabler of my creativity. And my dad was just sort of, a hardworking guy, was like, yeah, I get it kind of, but my mother got it completely.
So, how did you get your start as a musician? Like, were you playing in garage bands or how did that work?
Well, I grew up in Long Island, so I was when the Beatles hit, I was 11, and so by 13, I had my own little bands, and then by 15, I was had bands that were pretty good, and then by 16, I quit school and I wanted to become more of a singer-songwriter, like a James Taylor or something. So, that sort of was my initial stuff. But yeah, I did have my bands as a kid.
And then reading through your bio, I found something really interesting to me. I'm a huge comedy fan, and apparently a big part of your early career was being a part of an improv comedy group. So, how did you get involved in that world?
Well, first of all, I moved to Toronto in 1972. I was 19 years old, and my brother had moved there, and I was very close to my brother. And he just said, "Why don't you come up here and check it out? It's a great country, great city, Toronto, and maybe you'll have some good luck with your music. Maybe you'll get a record deal here, whatever." And I got there, and I had a record deal, and I had a girlfriend, and I had college gigs, and I was only 17 years old at that point. And so, really, from the time I became an official Canadian sort of green card holder, which is called landed immigrancy. Um, I was, 19 there, and I was really enjoying my life there and was playing a lot of gigs as a singer-songwriter. And I think that, the main thrust of this was that it gave me this leg up. And one of the legs up about me is that when someone asks me to do something creatively, I don't say no. I always say, "Oh, I'll try that." And at that point, my brother and two other friends had left underground theater in Toronto and created an improvisational comedy group. And they called it Homemade Theater. And they needed me to be the fourth member to do the music live for the shows. And so, yeah, I started doing that along with my earliest record productions were being done at the same time. And I was doing little film scores. I mean, I really was doing anything anybody asked because as a freelancer, I was diversifying and trying to make a living. And I was just a kid. But those years doing homemade theater and then homemade television, which was a Monty Python for kids we did on TV, um, I got a lot of, I learned while I earned, and I learned how to be a good improvisational performer.
I'm curious if maybe comedy was as big of a business then as it is maybe today. I mean, could you imagine a world where you stayed in that world rather than, shifting into music production?
It's a great question. I've never had that question. I don't think I would have because I still, don't forget, I was the musical guy in the group. So I think music still had a hold on me. So I don't think I ever would have been able to have done that. Also, I don't love the vanity involved in being a performer without an instrument. And so I probably wouldn't have. But no, the one thing is comedy is so important to us now. And in those days there weren't, 100 primetime specials of stand-up comedians. So it's a different world. It was, it's what it was like back then, though.
So how did you get into becoming a producer?
I'd love to say I answered a want ad, but I didn't. I just again, things happened. I was playing clubs and colleges, and another artist I played alongside of sometimes on the same bill was Dan Hill, and we were both kids really, and I thought Dan was really talented. He thought I was really talented, and he also knew that I had a love of recorded music and a real knowledge of recorded music. So at age, I guess it was age 19, that Dan asked me to produce a demo for him. And his demo was just a guitar vocal demo. So really, how much production really is there? Um, but I was like, yeah, of course, I'll try it, basically. So I said, of course, I'll do it. And that demo then led to a record deal for his first album, which was called Dan Hill in Canada. And then the second album we did was an album called Hold On. And then the third album was called Longer Fuse. And that's the album that broke us in the US with a hit single of Sometimes When We Touch. And so, but Dan was the reason I got started in producing. I mean, I never really thought of myself as someone who wanted to be a producer, but when I started to do it, I really loved it.
Did did you have your own gear or did you take him into a studio? How did that work originally?
Well, this was 1973 or something, so no one had their own gear. We went to a studio. It was a small four-track, reel-to-reel four-track studio, and probably charging us $50 an hour. And yeah, that was our first little session. And then we did our albums at major studios in Toronto.
So you and Dan have this hit together. Sometimes when we touch, everyone has heard it. How much does that change your life? Is it an overnight thing? Is it a gradual thing? How does that work?
Well, it certainly changed Dan's life much more than Matt and my partner at that point in producing Matt McCauley. Matt McCauley and I, we benefited really greatly from having that big a hit worldwide, of course. And we were just kids. So yeah, people started calling. Clive Davis hired us as in-staff producers, on-staff producers. Um, and so we were able to do semi-exclusive work for his company. And, we just were able to parlay things into that success. But, outside of a lot of the just sort of the cred that it gave us and therefore more work, it just made us feel a little better about ourselves.
Of course. Looking through your credits, it's I mean, it's crazy the amount of people you've worked with, the variety of genres you've dabbled into. Um, I want to kind of go through some of this. This might get a little Chris Farley show-esque here, but I want to just mention some of the things you've worked on and just, see what comes to mind. Something I listened to a bit this morning was the America record Alibi. And I'm curious what your memories are of making that record.
Well, first of all, I love Dewey and Jerry, who are the guys in America. One of my favorite experiences, two of my favorite experiences, because I produced them twice. I made two albums with them, one in the 80s and one in 2011. And I love them as friends. I love them as creators, and I love them as just, delightful people to work with. So Alibi was done in 1980, and Matthew McCauley and I were still working together at that point. He hadn't retired from music yet. So both of us really loved making that record. We had great tracking musicians. We had great time in the studio with Jerry and Dewey doing their vocals and having guest vocal singers do some backup. But, to produce America, who had so many hits, was again a great perk probably of us having some success before them because they were really our same age, and we were all kids.
You mentioned you had great studio musicians on that record. It's kind of a studio musician heavy album for them. Would you say that's fair?
I think, yes, I think a lot of their albums before they would use their road band. And they would occasionally bring in somebody, but we really wanted to use, our favorite studio players. And so at that point, we were able to use our players.
Now, I'm gonna say a genre term, and I'm hoping that it's not going to be an offensive thing to say. Do you consider Alibi to be what people would call yacht rock?
You know, I hate that term, although it's really helped a lot of people.
I tried to tread very lightly in
Yeah,
using it.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, do you like it? Are you liking the term or?
I mean, I definitely could see if it was my genre, I could see why you wouldn't like it.
I like the fact that it's brought a lot of music to light. I don't like the derogative sort of joke of
Right.
it
You
because
know, of rich
it's,
boys playing around in the studio or whatever it's supposed to
I
evoke.
mean, really what it was just of the time soft rock. And it happened to be very musically interesting soft rock. I mean, we were expanding musical horizons and using wonderful musicians. And um, so I think we were sort of, soft pop, soft, almost pop jazz at times. And I hate that term, but again, it really helped shed some light on that. But I do think the America album certainly would fit into that. Yeah.
That, how did you get into scoring and music supervising for film and TV?
Well, again, the book probably is one, the book has, I think, a major theme, which is survival through all sorts of musical ways, and I, and by the way, there's someone who's obviously cutting down a tree as we speak, or
I can't
playing
hear it, so you're all good.
great. Um, I think that in the book, you'll know that I've gone from different musical careers all through my life. And around 1985, I had moved back to LA, from LA to Toronto in 1981 after being there for 3 years, really getting sick of LA, and my career had slowed down. And so I just fell into some other work, which happened to be doing some music for a couple of TV movies. And that sort of interested me. And I got a Kurzweil 250 keyboard sampling synthesizer, and I was able to do that kind of work on it. And people liked what I was doing. And the next thing you know, I wasn't doing records for like 16 years, except for a couple. And I was only scoring television and film, and I had a great run.
You did a lot of work for Friday the 13th. Is horror music as fun to make as it would seem?
You know, it can be. I mean, I was never a fan of slasher movies. And I wound up doing Friday the 13th Part 7, Friday the 13th Part 8, and I did 72 episodes of the TV series Friday the 13th. And that series wasn't a slasher series. That was just almost like every week there would be a new Twilight Zone sort of vibe. And I loved that. So that was more fun. Doing the music for the real slasher horror movies, it got boring because, you'd have to be very percussive and very dissonant. And, it just seemed to be musically it was challenging to make it fresh for me. But again, I was also up for the job and I was young and I was like, hey, let's do it.
Okay, I've been waiting to ask you about this next one since we started.
Oh, I can't wait.
Daydream Believers. I am maybe the world's biggest Monkees fan. I watched about two-thirds of the movie again this morning. So please tell me, how did you get approached to take on this project?
Well, it was a VH1 project. I'm thinking it was 1999.
I watched it when it premiered.
Yeah, and I got the call because again, I was well known as a film composer. But the people who knew me, who were producing the project out of Canada, knew that I had also worked in records for years. So I think they liked that combination. So I did get the call and I got the meeting, and I loved the director, Neil Fernley, who sadly is gone. But Neil Fernley and I just got along like a house on fire. And he said to me, would you oversee the performing aspects musically in the movie, as well as, do the music when needed? And I'm like, absolutely. And I love that gig, by the way. Anytime anybody wants me to oversee live, performances on film of music, I'm really good at it and I love doing it. And the first part of that process, once I got the gig, was to, I was a big Monkees fan. And so that was for me the first thing to do. I had to go and meet with Harold Bronson from Rhino, who owned all that stuff. And then he would send me all this music and I would listen to it. And then they cast four guys who really were wonderful young guys. And they did have an essence of Peter Tork, Michael Nesmith, and Mickey Dolenz and Davy Jones. And I thought the casting was really good, and they were lovely guys. And the first thing I had to do with them was take them to a rehearsal room in Toronto, put guitars and drums around them, and teach them how to fake guys who faked. And that was the irony of it, And really, they became really good at it. And we were using the real recordings. Like we had the ability to use the real recordings.
I was wondering if they had musical knowledge in advance, or if the idea was to see people learning to play like in real time to make it more authentic,
They were hired because of their look and their acting ability.
much
They
like
had
the
one,
actual monkeys.
exactly, just like the actual Monkees. Now, it turns out again that a couple of them had a little bit of music in them, but I really had to work them hard. But again, what I also loved is once I worked them hard, they really got good. And when I oversaw the performances on film, I think we really did a great job.
Do you remember what the source material was for the live performance scenes in particular? Because I mean, that sounds like, that doesn't sound like the live Monkees record that I know.
Not sure, but I mean, it all came from Harold Bronson, so he might have had live tapes.
Yeah, interesting. And you made the incidental music, like the background music as well. Was that, I mean, this is a goofy question, but I mean, I can't imagine that it wasn't just like a ton of fun sitting around and making fake Monkees background music.
It was great. I mean, that's one of my favorite things to have done. I love that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's keep one more I want to ask you about that I saw on your list, or maybe there's so many here, but Kris Kristofferson. How can I not ask you about working with him?
Well, I was so fortunate. I had done an album for EMI through Jay Landers of Jimmy Webb doing his most famous songs, Unplugged and Intimate. And then Jay and I had a conversation, and Jay wanted to do a series of them. And so he said, "Who do you want to do next?" And we talked, and we agreed it would be Barry Mann, who, along with Cynthia Weil, wrote some of the greatest songs in our history. And I'd actually known and worked with Barry all my life, so that was perfect. And then the next one was Kris Kristofferson. And I had not ever really paid attention to Kris's records. I always felt that Kris was a genius writer and sort of what I called the Shakespeare of country music. And but I knew that his voice was sort of, a little raggedy, and I knew that his guitar playing apparently was terrible because I'd seen some stuff also, and I know that it was not his forte. And I didn't like the few records once we decided on Kris. I didn't like the records I had heard, especially the early ones, because they really put him in an ill-fitting Nashville suit musically with just, background singers, and they tried to make him croon, and he's not a crooner. I mean, he was devoted to Dylan. He wanted to be country's Dylan. So we approached Kris's manager, and then when I spoke to Kris on the phone, I said, "Listen, I know that you love Bob Dylan. I know that you loved him so much that you actually got a job as a janitor to be around when Dylan was recording in Nashville doing Blonde on Blonde." And he goes, "Yeah, yeah, I did. I would empty the ashtrays and just listen." And I said, "Well, what if we cut an album of your most famous songs and do it like almost a Blonde on Blonde feeling? Like just get four or five great players and just extemporaneously just work through the songs and give it that sort of really just immediate feeling." And he said, "That sounds great." And I had never met him until I got to the studio the day we were to start our recording. And he was the nicest, most brilliant, most lovely fellow. And we had such a ball. And it's always been Kris's favorite record. And I'm so proud of that. And there are great stories behind the making of that record, which I've put in the book. But I can tell you that again, we did it in Austin, Texas in 1997. And again, it was one of the greatest times of my life. Absolutely.
Well, you've mentioned the book several times, so I think it's only fair that we talk about it. It's called Unplugged. How recently did it come out?
It came out 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and yeah, it's called Unplugged, and it's um, really people call it a memoir, but it's really more of a memoir of my life in music. So, you don't get a chance to know my favorite food, but you do know the behind the scenes stories behind all these projects and the behind the scenes stories with all these wonderful people I've worked with.
How did you land on that title, Unplugged?
I had other titles, and a friend of mine bullied me. A very knowledgeable film director in LA who was very successful, but who had wrote a memoir of his own, along with it being sort of a primer for people wanting to write movies and be a screenwriter. And his name is Penn Densham. And Penn was a very successful TV and film director. And when I told him the titles I had, he just said, no, no. He said, you're going to call it Unplugged. Like he just threw it out right away. He said, Unplugged. And he said, it's going to be a subtitle of a, and you've got to name names. You got to, he just said, you've got to make sure that everyone knows who you are because if you go with the titles you were going to go with, which I think was basically something like Before I Forget, My Life in Music, he said, no one cares. But he said, if you put Unplugged and then you say, a life of working with the great, blah, 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 the great, and just he said, you've got to prop yourself up, Fred. You can't be subtle because no one's going to read the book.
The value of blunt advice from a friend.
It was blunt. He said, no. He just said, no, we're going to call it Unplugged. He said, we're going to call it Unplugged. Yeah.
What made you want to write it in the first place?
Well, the reason why I wanted to call the book Before I Forget is actually because I wanted to write it before I forgot. Because there's so much in the hard drive up here. And, sometimes the hard drive gets full. And so I started the book a number of years ago by doing long walks and talking into my phone and recording these stories. And then, when I had enough stories, I realized, I probably could make a book. And that was my big mistake because then I had to actually write the book.
Did you have to, was there other research involved? Did you, maybe dig up old studio notes or have journals or anything like that?
Very little, very little.
Did you write the book entirely yourself or did you have a co-writer or editor type situation? Just
I'm sorry to say I wrote it myself. I hired an editor. She did a nice job of organizing the book, but there was no particular editing being involved in her work. But um, it is my first book and my last because it was really a lot of work. Yeah.
what kind of process did you have for getting from, audio recordings of anecdotes to written words on the page?
Well, a lot of the times I would just play back my recordings that I had made, and and they were all spelled out in if you do on your iPhone, I recorded them into notes, and then I would put them on my computer and I would edit them and fix them, until I had a bunch, and then only when I got really serious a few years back, then I would start to really put the stories together, and then about a year ago, year and a half ago, that's when we really got serious and really put the book in its form now.
What kind of emotions does re-examining your life as a whole, what does that trigger inside you when you're doing that?
I'm laughing because um, it's a flood, it really depends on the day. I mean, JD, it's there are times when it almost doesn't feel like it's me. I mean, it just literally just who is this guy? And there's other times when I go, oh my God, yeah, boy, and that brings up a lot of memories. So yeah, it's an interesting situation. I've always been certainly, since the really beginning of my true career, a behind the scenes person, or as we call it, behind the camera person. And for me to have this full focus on me now is a combination of really nice and at the same time really uncomfortable.
You were never tempted to make your own records at any point?
Oh, I was. I started wanting to make my own records and I just didn't have any success. And I really wasn't the right guy. After a while, I realized that I really liked producing other artists and making their records as great as possible and to fulfill their dream. And I don't know if I had it in me to be a star or whatever. I just felt like as long as I was making music, I was really happy.
Getting back to the book, now that it's out, I mean, you said you'll never do another one, but are you happy with it? Do you feel like you succeeded in what you wanted to do?
I do, yeah. I mean, I can always do better. But I think overall, when I was able to say to my publisher, there's no more notes, there's no more redos, I'm done. That was a pretty good feeling, and I'm pretty happy. I would say if you told me I could make a few more minor changes, I probably still would. I probably still make them until I croak. But I think that it's a pretty good book the way it is now.
Yeah, I often find sometimes you just have to call something done. Sometimes done is better than perfect.
I think there's a couple of great things. One is my shrink uh, ha always had a great line, which was, "Perfect is the enemy of good." And I love that line because obviously perfect gives you nowhere to move, and good means good, but you might want to fix this and here and there. So I think I did a good job. Perfect, no. And the one thing I think we're dealing with here is um, I wanted to make the book feel accessible to virtually anyone, although clearly I think people in the music world or aspiring people who want to make music as producers or engineers or artists, I think the book is helpful to that.
Do you think that was, I mean, was that an intent going in that you wanted to provide sort of a roadmap, or was that just an accidental benefit?
No, I think it was both. I wanted to do both.
Well, tell me, where do people get the book? I mean, obviously Amazon, but is there a place you'd prefer people go?
There's a taco truck that right now is on Union Avenue from 2 to 7. No, just kidding. Um, I do miss Memphis, by the way. I'll be there in August. I'm doing a book signing, by the way, third week of August at Lansky's wonderful clothing store at the Hotel Peabody.
Oh,
So
cool.
I'm doing an event there, and I don't know the exact date, but it is the third week in August.
Well, send
So,
me the date and I'll try to
oh my God,
help spread
absolutely.
the word.
Oh, yeah, I can go dig it up in like 2 minutes. I can just text it to you. Uh, but as far as I'm sorry, what's the full question that you asked? Because I
Oh, the
want
question was, I mean, of course, the book is available via Amazon, but is there another place like your website or something that you
right.
would
See, and
rather people get it
I was
from?
joking. I was joking with the taco truck, but uh, we do have books available wherever books are sold, especially obviously Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. You can also ask your local bookstore to order it, which I would love you to do. And we do have a situation. There's a website now that is fredmollinunplugged.com, and they send me books that I autograph once I get the book through that website.
Oh, that's very cool. So you can get a signed copy.
Absolutely. And I would love to sign anyone's copy. Yeah.
Well, okay, let's get back to the Chris Farley list then, since we did the book.
Okay.
Um, if you got a few more minutes,
I have
because
plenty of time. I look forward to this.
well, I you have done so much work for Disney. How did you get into making children's music?
Well, I think the irony here, JD, is that I started to work for Disney Records, writing music and performing music on record for children after I had done Friday the 13th, Part 7 and Part 8, and the Friday the 13th TV series, and a Vampire Cop series, and all sorts of The Outer Limits, and all sorts of other stuff. Um, and luckily, Jay Landers, who's been really a tremendous patron saint of mine, was over at Disney Records in 1998. And he called me and said, listen, and again, JD, this follows the same path where someone says, will you try this? And I'm like, yeah, I'm up for it. I'll try anything. So he said, I've got a great idea. We've come up with a beautiful idea of doing a album called Disney's Lullaby Album. And we want instrumental, very meditative music, generally Disney songs done in that style, to put a child to sleep, to put a baby to bed. And I was basically like, sounds good to me. And he knew my musicality. And even though he knew I had done all sorts of stuff in the film horror genre, etc., he also knew that I had produced very important emotional records. So he thought I was a good guy musically to do this. And it turned out to be a tremendous success. I mean, we did six others for Disney. And then I actually wound up running Disney's A&R in Burbank for a year when I had my first real job for 1 year. And so I've done a lot of music for children, and I've done a lot of lullaby instrumental music for children. And it happens to be probably some of my most successful work as an artist. And also it brings me a lot of good feelings because I do a lot of good with it. So it's great.
How do you approach writing a song for kids differently than you would for, a grown up?
Well, the instrumental lullabies, I only wrote a couple of originals. Most of the time, they're just versions of Disney songs or, Beatles songs or whatever. Um, but then I did a lot of records for Disney, which I did write songs for. And you know what? It's very easy for me to write a song and put my head into, a lyric and music that a lot of little children would like. So I actually find writing music for children, music and lyrics, really easy.
You have also made what I am gonna just call a couple of celebrity albums. You have recorded with actors who are artists who are not known as musicians first. And the two that jump out of the page, off the page for me on that, are Frank Stallone and Rita Wilson, which I was actually listening to AM FM a bit of this morning as well.
Well, I love that album. Rita Wilson, Tom Hanks's wife, um, always was a singer, but she had never made a career out of it. So she had been an actress, and Tom decided to give her her first album, and he financed the first album, which then Decca Records picked up. And it's a gorgeous, beautiful record we did, and she has a lovely voice. And since then has made like seven or eight other albums, and is considering herself certainly primarily a singer these days. So that was a lovely way to start her career, and I was glad I was there. And we did another album later on, and we stay in touch. And Frank Stallone is just a character because, Frank also had success in music. He had a big hit before I worked with him for the Staying Alive movie. Frank happens to be a monstrous singer, like literally has the chops of a Sinatra or a Bobby Darin. And he wanted to do, this was 1985, I think. He wanted to make a record that was sort of big band swing and big band ballads using Sammy Nestico, who was one of the greatest arrangers in the history of arranging. And he got me to co-produce it with him. And, this is not an actor turned singer. This is a singer turned actor. He was absolutely brilliant. And he had the kind of voice that could command so much that he would be front and center with fantastic big band arrangements that would swallow up anybody else. So that's a great record too, if you ever find that album. I think it's called In Love in Vain, and it's still available. So, go listen to Frank's album. That's gorgeous.
Do you think that part of the the kick of working on stuff like that is maybe confounding the lower bar of expectations that maybe comes with that? Because I mean, certainly that Rita Wilson record, her voice is gorgeous, and the sparse production around some of those songs is just, I think, really, it's a really neat reinterpretation of some of those songs.
I think it was great fun. First of all, they were both lovely people. And so we had a lot of fun. I mean, when I make a record, if it's not joyful, it's a mistake. And there's only been a couple of times in my entire career that making a record wasn't absolutely joyful. And those two projects, were just, I couldn't get out of them for some reason. Otherwise, I would have. But there's a lot of records that I've done. And Rita's and Frank Stallone's, they were just so much fun. I mean, so I don't think we really were thinking about what the public would perceive. I just think we were too busy making music and laughing.
What do you do in a situation where it's not going well in the studio? I actually used to run a little project studio in Memphis many years ago, and I took on some projects that I was less than enthusiastic about, and know how challenging that can be. What do you do in that scenario?
Well, I think I'm pretty lucky, JD, because I'll always meet with my artist and try to get to know them a little bit before we start. And when we go through the songs we're going to do, etc., I have pretty good instincts that if it's going to be a problem, I bow out, you know. So I really have only had one or two projects ever that were nothing but joy. So I think that I have a good vetting process, and I can tell. Like just recently, there was a alumni of I think American Idol, yeah, American Idol, and I remember that we started talking about a Christmas album, and we had, I was looking forward to it, and I just, after a number of conversations and Zooms, I just had to say to Karen, who's my fiance, I said, man, I don't want to do this record. I just feel like we're not going to get along. And so that's what I do. I mean, I just said, hey, listen, I don't think I'm the right guy for this, but I wish you all the luck in the world. So I try to get out of that before it happens. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes no can be a powerful act of self-care. And it's great that you're able to say no to stuff and don't have to worry about it. Is there is there something you're working on now that you're excited about or something coming up?
Well, the most fun I've had just recently, meaning like last week, was I did a great one-off cut with Brooke Morober, who's from New York and has had some nice response in the country pop and country Americana world, and Little Anthony of Little Anthony and the Imperials.
Ooh, cool.
So we did a version of Hurt So Bad, which was Little Anthony's biggest hit he ever had. And I think it's on the list of the most played 200 records in the history of radio. And so we did a very big, almost operatic version, duet of Hurt So Bad. And I just got the mixes together last night. I worked with my mixer on and off all day long yesterday because it's really probably the most cantankerous and biggest sounding production I've done in years. So,
Yeah, I mean, kind of a hallmark of some of your more recent work has been the sparseness of some of it. So that's interesting.
yeah, I can really dig doing a Spectre thing. I call things Spectorian, and I did a very Spectorian version of Hurt So Bad, which I hope you guys will hear soon. But it's really good. I mean, Little Anthony sounds fantastic. He's 84, and it's Brooks' best vocal she's ever done, and the production is, it's just big. It's fabulous. It's operatic. Yeah.
Do you have any idea when that might see the light of day?
I'm hoping sometime soon. I mean, it's on a label called Reviver out of Nashville, and I'm not quite sure how they're going to sort of roll it out. But my job is done now, and it just I'm so proud of it.
Well, Fred, this has been a hoot. Is there anything we missed?
Man, you got to read the book, I guess, and remind me. It's been a musical life, and I always say to people, I think it's an honorable achievement, and I think it's an honorable way to live if you live a musical life. Um, there's a beauty in it, and I'm very fortunate that mine has been so good, and I'm always extremely grateful every day that I've been able to do what I do.
You said Fred Mollin unplugged.com is where people can get the signed copy if they want it.
That's correct. If they want to go through that, then that they send me the books and I sign them. Yeah.
Great. Well, Fred, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me.
Well, I thank you so much and also I love some of the questions. I really appreciate that.
Cool. I'm glad. I'm glad.